Because I would go ahead and say that, no, this is not a good argument against God. This is not. This is a very, very weak argument. So, there's a video from Red Pen Logic called Atheist Offers 10 Fallacies to Disprove God. Now, I'm not one to usually agree with Red Pen Logic or Mike Winger on a whole lot of things, but I figure that there is a lot of really bad argumentation for atheism on the internet, so I figured, why not go ahead and look over this and see what things I agree with and what things I disagree with, and maybe we can even reconstruct some of these arguments to make them a little stronger. Who knows? We'll see what we can do. But first, let's get into the fan art section, and then we'll get into the video at hand. First one here is from Imperial Minster. It has been done, Jealousal Suris. Oh, I love the little slime Suris right here. He's so happy. He's so happy. The next one we have here is from the L1985. Not my best work. The ink got smudged. But have a chippy Suris. Aww. It looks so good, though. It looks so good. Why is it that whenever artists are like, this isn't my best work, I'm actually not doing a good job with this one? It's always something that looks perfectly fine. What is with that? As always, everybody, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, subscribe. And on to the content. All right. Let's go and see here.
This is going to be a good one. So a few days ago, I'm scrolling through the comments section of this channel, and I came across something that left me speechless. At first, I wasn't sure if this was serious or if it was just a joke. The comment claimed to offer 10 ways to prove that God doesn't exist. This comment also caught the attention of my friend, Mike Winger, who has a teeny tiny YouTube channel called The Bible Thinker.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. These edits are kind of obnoxious. Just a little bit.
You probably haven't heard of it. For fun, I challenged Winger to respond to all 10 challenges in less than 2 minutes. Mike said, under 2 minutes? That's 12 seconds each. I don't know if I can do that. I said, fine.
Again, those edits are really, really fucking annoying. Ivana, thank you for naming your points for an... Oh, well. I guess maybe my interactions with my audience aren't even anywhere near as annoying. Well, let's see here.
3 minutes. He replied, challenge accepted. But why should Mike get to have all the fun? So, because I'm a good sport, I decided to show Winger how it's done. It's time to make Mike my wingman.
And then a very, very loud intro.
I help you assess bad thinking by using good thinking, and we have way too much fun while we're doing it. Today's challenge comes courtesy of Brian Doyle. He offers 10 ways to prove that God doesn't exist. Let's see what he's got. Video guy, please put 3 minutes on the clock, and let's include a fallacy counter, just because.
Okay.
Proof number 1. The fact that a human being has to tell you about the existence of your God proves there's no God. We would be born with knowledge of its existence.
All right, before we actually get any further into this, in chat, how many of you actually believe that this is a good argument against God? Because I would go ahead and say that, no, this is not a good argument against God. This is not. This is a very, very weak argument. So this presupposes that you have a God that requires knowledge of itself as part of its plan or as part of its necessity for existence. You're presupposing a very particular type of God with this, and there's no way to know that that's the God that we're talking about here. We would be born with knowledge of its existence. There's nothing saying that that would be the case. A God can both exist and we wouldn't have knowledge of its existence. That's a perfectly reasonable position. This is not a reasonable argument. But let's go ahead and see what Winger and Red Pen Logic have to say about it.
The first proof offers the first fallacy. It's called a non sequitur. The conclusion just doesn't follow. Human beings have to tell us about the existence of all kinds of things, but that doesn't prove that those things don't exist. For example, teachers tell terrified students about fractions, but that doesn't prove there's no fractions. Bad start. Proof number 2. A God belief is simple geography. Being raised in a Christian home decides which God you believe in.
Okay, so he actually said being raised in a religious home decides which God you believe in, not a Christian home. But, this actually is true. The God that you are most likely to believe in is going to be based on your geography. People who are born in a Muslim country are more likely to believe in a Muslim form of God. People who are born in the United States are more likely to believe in the Christian God. And even if they don't believe in the Christian God, they are more likely to believe in a Christocentric version of religion. Is this the apologist with the weird eyes? Does he have weird eyes? Maybe I'm just really bad at tracking weirdness in other people. This is not a proof that God doesn't exist, though. Like, 2 is a premise for another argument, basically. You would use God belief coinciding with geography as part of some other syllogism. This, in and of itself, is not an argument. Said, that wasn't the right fallacy. A teacher isn't required to know fractions. I'm pretty sure that still was the right fallacy, and yet there's nothing about a... What? Low-fat latte. Wait, hold on. I feel like maybe you misheard what he said, because that has nothing to do with what he said there. His argument for number 1 was that a human being having to tell you the existence of God proves there's no God, we should be born with knowledge. That is a non sequitur. That's on its own. And then separate from it being a non sequitur, his argument was that a teacher might teach you about fractions, and might have to teach you about fractions, and that doesn't mean that fractions don't exist. Now, we could say that his comparison is bad because God and something like math are 2 different types of belief categories. We can do that, but I don't think that that's really what he's trying to say here. He's just trying to point out there's all kinds of things we don't know about that we have to be taught about. Now, if you take that number 1 on its own, there is a separate argument that can be made. Said fractions don't have divine powers and didn't supposedly create humanities. Fractions have demonic power. Jesus. There is a said note, number is pretty bad though. Yeah. So we can say with number 1, before we continue with number 2, we can say with number 1 that a God that has a requirement for you to believe in him is unjust if we are not born with knowledge of that God's existence. We can say he's unjust. That's a perfectly reasonable statement, because the justness of the action actually follows from the circumstances that are given in the premise. But that's not what's being told here. What this basically is me saying, like, hey, if you're going to do the atheism on the internet thing, which I do, I'm an atheist on the internet, and I have a channel that talks about politics and philosophy and atheism on the internet, please do better. All we're saying is please do better. But anyway, number 2, God belief is simple geography. Again, that's not an argument against a God, that's just showing that, hey, it is more likely you'll believe in a certain God based on geography. That doesn't mean that a God or gods doesn't exist, though. That's not actually evidence against them.
This is a textbook example of the genetic fallacy. You cannot invalidate a belief by showing how someone came to hold that belief. So this proof is about God belief, not about whether or not God exists. Put another fallacy on the board. So much for proof number 2. Proof number 3. There was no time before the Big Bang, so that means that there was no time for a God to exist in or create things in.
Okay, so that's not a good argument either. So the t=0 event is when time begins, and that is the Big Bang, yes, but that's time for our universe. That is our universe turning from a stagnant state to the constant state that it's in right now. But there's arguments that our universe exists within a greater cosmos. So this is also a bad argument. Also, Christians tend to believe that God exists outside of our universe, and therefore is not constrained by the rules of our universe. So the t=0 event wouldn't matter to that God. It feels really weird when we're having to do this particular type of, like, counter apologia. But again, atheists who do internet stuff do better.
This challenge mistakenly assumes that God is necessarily a temporal being, that he must exist and act in time. But Christians have traditionally held that God is a timeless being outside of time prior to creation. So there's no
Okay, again, that's what I just said earlier, so that makes sense.
proof here, just a straw man fallacy. Proof number 4. The Abrahamic God cannot exist because it wasn't the first God to be created. There are other gods that have been proclaimed to exist before this God. They can't all be true, so if we can deny the existence of one of these gods, we can use the same method to deny them all.
Okay, so this is not necessarily a proof that the Christian God does not exist. This is an argument that it is unlikely that the Christian God exists, or that various gods exist. But this is using human belief as the only arbiter for whether or not a god does exist. Like, human belief in the Christian God begins at certain time. Therefore, Christian God doesn't exist. Argument would go that if you believed in Anubis at a certain point in time, the fact that that belief began at a certain point means that that god does or doesn't exist. That's another non sequitur to me. Also, Hannah Reloaded, thank you so much for the raid. This is an awkward time to come in. I do not believe in a Nubian. Stevie with a Q, thank you for resubscribing. How's it going, guys? How's it going? So what we're doing is we are covering a video from Red Pen Logic, who is going over 10 ways to prove a god doesn't exist. And what we're finding is, awkwardly, the 10 proofs that are being given by the atheist here are actually not that great either. What we're trying to do is make it to where atheists can construct better arguments against the existence of God by showing flaws in the arguments that are presented here. I'm trying to find the flaws that I can before I let Red Pen do their thing. God could have been a jerk and waited to reveal himself. Yeah, like, there's nothing saying that, like, that the Christian God couldn't just be a fucking asshole. Sylvia Silica, thank you for redeeming your points for an... Oh, whoa. And Tarlin, thank you for redeeming your points, because we're still in the middle of the nuke for an... Oh, whoa. Thank you both. Thank you both. Oi, oi, oi. With the reverb. I'm lore now? Oh my god. It could be, just could be a trickster god. Yeah, just could be evil. Just could be an asshole.
If this is a good argument against God, then it's also a good argument against science, since older false concepts are often replaced by newer true concepts. On Doyle's logic, since the older geocentric view is false, we can just deny the newer heliocentric view by the same method. Of course, this is silly. We should weigh the evidence for each theory and for each god. Another non sequitur on the board.
This is why the best thing to do is largely not to try to argue that a god does not exist necessarily. The best thing to do is accept that there is not sufficient evidence to believe in a god. I know that people make fun of, like, lacktheism all the time, but I'm sorry, it is a reasonable position. Lofat Latte says, any argument that claims to prove God does not exist is going to run into the same issues proving he does exist have. The null hypothesis is the only reason, as far as I'm aware, that people believe as though God doesn't exist. However, defaulting to the null hypothesis is all that is necessary to not hold a belief in God. True. So after you get better evidence, you can. So, like, okay, so here's the thing. I agree with what Lofat Latte said there. The null hypothesis is one way of going about just accepting that, hey, we don't really have reason to believe that a god exists. Another thing that you can do, though, is you can disprove certain concepts of God. So, like, you may not be able to say the Christian God doesn't exist. But what you can do is, and this is the difference between what's called local and global atheism. Global atheism is the rejection of all gods and deities of all types, and local atheism is the rejection of certain types of deities. So there is a way to disprove certain types of deities. For instance, if we have, say, the claim that the Christian God is all good, we can show evidence that the Christian God cannot necessarily be all good. We can show that the Christian God is not necessarily an omnibenevolent being. Those are things we can do. We might not be able to say, for instance, that the God definitely does or doesn't exist, but we can say that the God definitely or definitely isn't a fucking asshole. Those are things we can do. Again, pick the battles and pick them better. But let's see what the fifth one is.
Proof number 5. God either allows the devil to exist and is an accomplice, or it isn't an all-powerful God. An all-powerful and all-loving God wouldn't allow the devil to exist.
So that's not an argument that God doesn't exist. That's an argument that God is not all good or all-powerful or all-loving. This actually is a good argument. This one is. Red Pen, this is going to be the point where I probably disagree with Red Pen logic. I'm going to go ahead and predict what he says, because I haven't watched the video yet. I'm going to make a prediction that this is all part of what God's mysterious plan, or that the devil is part of God's plan, what have you. But I don't think that a being that's entire purpose is to fuck up humanity and trick people into being damned to hell for eternity, I don't think that an all-good God allows that, or an all-loving God allows that. But let's see what Red Pen says.
Isaiah 45:7, KJV. Doyle sets up a false dilemma. It's not an either or. There's another option. God is all powerful and all loving, and God allows the devil to exist because he has good reason to do so.
He doesn't, though. I'm sorry, he just doesn't. This is the God works in mysterious ways. This is the God works in mysterious ways argument. It's not an argument. It's not an argument at all whatsoever.
Which is why philosophically trained atheists have largely abandoned this proof. Fallacy, false dilemma. Proof number 6. The God of the Bible is jealous of other gods. This proves that this God is not the only God. With multiple choices, only shows that there is no reason to choose just one. If a God were true, there would be no other option.
All right, I disagree with this one entirely. Holy shit. Maybe it's just that I know too many people who are polytheistic, but the existence of multiple gods does not necessarily mean that somebody would or would not want to follow a particular version of a god. Like, I love multiple fruits, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to choose pineapple when it's available. I've got a hierarchy of fruits, and I like the fruit that eats me back the most. That's the same way that people can view God belief. Now, if your God necessarily has to be the only God in existence, then I might agree with you. And the Christian God largely does purport to be the only God that exists. At least that's the way most Christians try to argue about that God. So this is one of those like loosey-goosey, maybe type of things, but it's not a good piece of evidence against the existence of a God. Again, polytheism exists. It exists for a fucking reason. Also, Baja Blast, that cracks me the fuck up. I like the fruit that bites me back. Oh boy.
Exodus 34:14. As a teacher who has given thousands of multiple choice tests over the years, I can say with some authority that multiple choices does not mean that there's no reason to choose just one. There are false answers, just like there are false gods.
Okay, but if your God, so there's a part that you're missing here though. If the false answers are in fact gods, then your God is not the only deity that exists. Like, if your version of God requires that God to be the only God, then why even argue that there are other gods in the first place? And that's all in your Bible. I agree that there being multiple choices doesn't mean that there's not a correct choice or a better choice, but I disagree that you can throw this entire thing under the water, because just saying like, oh, the word God has different meanings. Well, who is to say what those meanings are? Are you going to go back in time and figure out the exact hermeneutic structure for every single thing that was written in the Old Testament? Like, I'm sorry, but Old Testament's pretty clear. There are just multiple gods that are believed in. He doesn't become more of a omni one-of deity until later on in biblical canon.
Another non sequitur. Proof number 7. There is no evidence that spiritual energy exists, so we can conclude that psychics, ghosts, and gods are non-existent. Otherwise, God has nothing to be made of.
All right, so yes, there is no evidence that spiritual energy exists. Yes, there is no evidence that psychics, ghosts, or gods exist. There is no material evidence of these things. However, the claim that Christians make all the time is that God is outside of reality, that God is outside of our world. So arguing that he's not made of the stuff that we expect in our world doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, because evidence against ghosts and evidence against psychics is not the same thing as evidence against God. Again, I don't believe a God exists. I don't believe we have a good reason to believe that there is a deity out there. I really just personally don't. But that does not mean that this is a good reason for that.
Not this again. An immaterial being, by definition, is not made of material.
Yeah, again, so there is no evidence of psychic energy, there's no evidence of all this, but there are immaterial things that no less affect our lives. Evidence being math. Math is immaterial. The concept of math, or an idea, the concept of an idea, those are immaterial things. Ideas are not made of material. The memory of them may be stored in our brain matter, but ideas are immaterial. Concepts are immaterial. There's immaterial things all the fucking time. Now, if you want to degrade your God, who's supposed to be an all-powerful being, to the same level of something like an idea that is immaterial and has no substance, that's on you. This is Bertram's Teapot. You can't disprove a negative. Thank you for the 95 bits tea with the goblins. Also, EB Games, thank you for the thank you for the raid. Why are you drunk? EB, why are you drunk? Why have you been drinking? What have you been doing? Oh my god. Munchie Meister VT, thank you for the follow. Every time there was a house fire, I drank.
I'm not going too quickly here, am I? God is not made of anything. God is spirit. God is spirit, but he's not made of spiritual energy. He's immaterial. So this is a straw man. But Doyle might also be begging the question by assuming materialism, that matter and energy are all that exist. Proof number 8, there is no such thing as nothing. For nothing to exist...
Huh?
Wait, how can nothing exist? Nothing can't exist. By definition, nothing can't exist. That's a paradox. How would nothing exist? That doesn't work! That doesn't work! Ah! Jesus Christ. Oi, oi, oi.
Nothing to exist?
would cause it to be something. Creationists believe that God created the universe out of literal nothing. This is an equivocation of the word nothing. By nothing, we mean no thing. That is, God didn't make the universe out of anything. We certainly do not believe that God created the universe out of something that's called nothing. So there's no thing here that disproves God.
Okay, that's just really fucking bad wordplay. I'm sorry. Also, Constance and Nubian, both of you, stop. Both of you, stop. Stop it. But, okay, so wordplay aside, let's go ahead and stop the wordplay shit, and let's go ahead and use the term that would actually be used. Said, wait, didn't it come from his word? So you said the same thing the person said. Yeah, no, let's use the actual word that would be used in philosophical circles, ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is what we would use, right? Universe created ex nihilo. So, or nihilo, or however you want to pronounce it. It doesn't matter. The point is, a universe created from nothing. A universe created from literal absence of matter. So, did God create the universe from an absence of matter? Was there not matter there, and then there was matter after the fact? If that is the claim that Christians have, then you're just saying the same thing he did.
See what I did there? Proof number 9.
Hold on. And you're just pointing out, like, there's no such thing as nothing. For nothing to exist, this would cause there to be something. So there can be a concept where, like, there's a cosmos, and then there's a pocket that we would understand as our universe that contains no matter. Think of it like an empty jar. There's nothing there, not even air. The Christian version of a god would have taken that pocket of nothing and added material to it or created something there. Now, there's no evidence that that was the case. As far as we know, the T=0 event meant that there was all of material that existed in the world condensed into a very, very small singularity. So we don't really have evidence that this is what happened. As far as we know, matter didn't come into existence. Matter just always existed. Energy just always existed.
This isn't a finely tuned world created with us in mind. The sun gives you cancer, most of the water is undrinkable, and diseases run rampant. If there was an intelligent designer, there wouldn't be any mistakes. First, just because you can't drink the ocean or antifreeze doesn't mean they're not designed. They're just designed for another purpose. Second, something doesn't have to be perfectly designed in order to be intelligently designed. Third, imperfect design is perfectly consistent with intelligent design in a broken world.
Except okay, so no. That's a stupid reason. I'm gonna go ahead and stop you there. A god necessarily created our world, in the Christian view, the god necessarily created our world in a broken state. To argue that he did not do that is to argue that God did not have perfect knowledge of what was going to happen later on down the road. God created the world broken. God created the world fucked up. God created a world that has cruelty and ligma disease to kill children. God created this world, in your view. We either accept that he created an imperfect world, or we make really shitty apologia for it. Right now, you're doing the really shitty apologia for it. Saying like, oh, this is consistent with a broken world is saying, hey, I have a book that explains why everything's fucked up, so it definitely totally can't be my God's fault. Except your God has perfect knowledge, so it is, and he did make it this way? This is the point where I have to say that, like, the guy that you're talking about might have a lot of very malformed arguments, but this one is evidence that your God is, at the very least, all good, or perfect.
Number 9 offers another non sequitur. Proof number 10. Evolution is obviously proven and true. This means that we weren't created by magic and are somehow superior to the animal kingdom. No creator, no God.
This is a bad argument as well, because it's very easy for Christians to just take evolution and say that, hey, evolution is the vehicle that God used to make humanity go burr. Like, that's a thing that they can do. That's a very, very easy thing for Christians to do. It's a thing that I did back when I was a Christian. So this is not a good argument against Christianity. Now, it is an argument against the global flood. It is an argument against Adam and Eve. It is an argument against both of those stories, however. There are individual stories in the Bible that are completely invalidated by the realities of evolution, because one of the things that evolution points to is that we can experience this lovely thing called genetic bottleneck. So, what I'm saying is, evolution may not disprove God. It's not really supposed to. But if the global flood happened, then literally everywhere in the world right now is the back alleys of Alabama. And since we're not, I think we can conclude that at the very least the global flood didn't happen. But okay.
Biological evolution, even if true, has nothing to do with the existence.
Even if true? Even if true? If? Oh boy. Oh, I could have a field day with that one. I'm gonna choose not to.
Of God. It has to do with God's alleged role in biology. That's all. If Darwin was right, atheists can still be wrong, as shown by a large number of theistic evolutionists. So this is another non sequitur. Despite what you've been told, evolution doesn't disprove God. Stop the clock.
At least he's right there. Evolution doesn't disprove a God. It just disproves like 2 or 3 Bible stories. So it at least disproves the Bible.
Boom. That is how it's done, Mike Winger. There's no way Mike did under 3 minutes. That guy's videos are an hour long. There's no possible way he's gonna do this in 3 minutes. Well, there you have it, folks. We did 10.
Okay, and that's it for your video then. That's all it is. Okay. So if that's all it is, then we can say that we went over the arguments that were given. We went over the issues, the consistency issues, and also the things that I agree with red pen logic. What I find interesting is that when we go over stuff like this, you realize how far you can go with a lot of arguments. There are arguments against the existence of God that are just absolutely poor and are things that you will see riddled in YouTube comment sections. This is what a lot of people mean when they talk about, like, Reddit atheism, basically. We can do better. If we are going to engage in this particular conversation, then we probably should engage in it with a little bit of elevated philosophy as opposed to just repeating whatever stuff we heard recently on whatever talk show we've listened to recently, and malforming the way that those arguments are said in any case. But that doesn't mean the red pen logic is right. I still don't think his God exists. I don't. I just really don't. But what issues did you have with these arguments? And do you agree with me or the original commenter? Or do you agree with red pen logic? Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, everybody, fuck off. I'm kidding. Insert end of video tagline here.